My friends, let me tell you something that may shake you to the core, something that may challenge everything you've been holding on to in the quiet corners of your heart. There comes a time in every soul's journey where God says, let them go. And when He says it, you must not hesitate, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of obedience. Because something begins to shift spiritually, deeply, eternally, when you release what no longer belongs to your destiny. What you let go of on earth, God acknowledges in the heavens. And when you release someone from your grasp, God releases something from His. Too often we cling to people not because they belong in our lives, but because we are afraid of what life will look like without them. We think we need their approval, their companionship, their presence. We wrap our worth around their words, our peace around their actions, and our identity around their opinions. And yet, God whispers in the stillness, they are not tied to your purpose. And when God reveals this truth to you, it is not to cause you pain, but to bring you peace. Because when you let go, you're not just losing someone, you're making room for God to enter in a new way. There is a spiritual war that begins when you choose to let go of someone God never intended you to hold. Because the enemy thrives in the connections that keep you bound. He thrives in the relationships that drain your soul. And the moment you walk away from what was holding you back, the enemy starts to tremble. Because now you are stepping into spiritual authority. You are no longer tied to manipulation. You are no longer entangled in emotional bondage. You are no longer seeking permission from people to become who God already declared you to be. Letting go is not weakness, it is warfare. It is you rising up and saying, I choose God's will over my emotions. I choose purpose over comfort. I choose peace over chaos. When you walk away from what drains you, you walk toward what God has destined for you. And heaven rejoices when you finally align your spirit with what God has already spoken over your life. You see, there are people who were only assigned to your life for a season, not a lifetime. Some were there to teach you, to test you, or to shape you, but not all were meant to stay. And the mistake we make is trying to make temporary people permanent fixtures in our spiritual walk. When God moves, He doesn't ask for your comfort. He asks for your obedience. And when He says, let go, He's already prepared what's next. But you can't receive what's next while clinging to what was. Spiritually, something powerful takes place when you let someone go. You are declaring to the heavens that you trust God more than you trust your own understanding. You are declaring that your peace is not found in a person, but in the presence of God. And the moment you surrender that relationship to God's hands, you step into a new spiritual season. You unlock a realm of clarity. You begin to hear God more clearly. You begin to feel lighter, not because the pain disappears, but because you are no longer carrying something that wasn't yours to hold. There are soul ties that break when you let someone go. There are invisible chains that fall. There are generational cycles that stop with your decision, because some of what you're fighting is not even about the person. It's about the spirit behind the attachment. When God tells you to release someone, He's protecting you from a spiritual parasite, something that drains your energy, clouds your vision, and delays your growth. And when you obey, the shackles fall and your spirit begins to heal. Do you know how many people delay their destiny because they won't release someone who's already walked out in the spirit? They're physically present but spiritually absent. They smile in your face, but their presence disturbs your peace. That's not love. That's spiritual conflict. And God is not the author of confusion. When God is in it, there is clarity. When God is in it, there is order. When God is in it, you don't have to sacrifice your sanity to keep someone close. There's a reason God sometimes allows heartbreak. Because nothing gets your attention like broken pieces. Nothing makes you run to God like the absence of what once gave you comfort. But even in the heartbreak, God is moving. He is pruning. He is preparing, because before He blesses, He separates. Before He elevates, He isolates. And sometimes the greatest act of spiritual growth is not holding on, but letting go. The longer you hold what God has already asked you to release, the heavier your spirit becomes. You start to feel drained, confused, anxious, restless. That's not God punishing you. That's the spiritual weight of disobedience. You were not created to carry what God told you to put down. You were not anointed to stay connected to what God has already removed His hand from. And if you want to walk in freedom, you must release what is not assigned to your next season. Let me ask you, what are you afraid of losing? Are you afraid of loneliness, rejection, emptiness? God knows. But do you not believe that the same God who gave you life can fill that void? Do you not believe that the God who knows the end from the beginning has already prepared a new beginning for you? You are not letting go into nothing. You are letting go into the arms of a faithful God. When you let go, you silence the lies. The lie that says you need them to be happy. The lie that says you won't survive without them. The lie that says your worth is tied to how someone treats you. No, your worth is tied to the one who created you. And when you know who you are in God, you don't beg people to stay. You don't chase after what left. You don't apologize for choosing peace. Because now you understand, it's not about who walked away, it's about who you're walking toward. Letting go is not the end, it is the beginning. The beginning of healing, the beginning of clarity, the beginning of a new spiritual awakening. When you finally let go, you begin to see what you couldn't see before. You begin to hear God in a way you never heard Him before. Because now there's space for Him to speak. Now there's space for Him to move. And don't let the enemy deceive you into thinking that letting go means you failed. No. Sometimes the greatest victory is in the release. The moment you release them, you reclaim your power. You take back your peace. You reposition your soul under the covering of God. And that's when the real battle begins. Not around you, but within you. Because the enemy will try to pull you back. He will use memories. He will use guilt. He will use fear. But when your spirit is anchored in God, no tactic of the enemy can prevail. There is a spiritual release that comes with obedience. And when you walk in that obedience, doors open, burdens lift, walls fall, and peace flows like a river. You will begin to see blessings you didn't ask for. You'll begin to receive favor you didn't work for, because you made the hard decision, the God decision. And heaven always honors obedience. Some of you are still praying for clarity when God has already given you the answer. You keep asking, should I let them go? But deep down, your spirit already knows. God already whispered it in the silence. He already confirmed it through the chaos. He already gave you the signs. You're just waiting for it to be easy. But obedience is rarely easy. It is costly. It requires faith. It requires trust. But the reward of obedience is always greater than the cost of disobedience. There's something that shifts when you finally let them go. Your nights become quieter. Your days become lighter. Your thoughts become clearer. Not because everything is perfect, but because your spirit is no longer in conflict. You are no longer torn between what God said and what your emotions want. You are aligned. And when you're aligned with God, you are dangerous to the enemy. Some of you have been in spiritual delay because you refuse to release what God asked you to. You've been stuck in the same place, praying for breakthrough, but holding on to baggage. You can't move forward with one foot in the past. You can't soar while clinging to dead weight. God is calling you higher. But to rise, you must release. It's not personal, it's spiritual. Not every disconnection is a loss. Some are divine. Some are God's protection in disguise, because He knows what you don't. He sees what you can't. And what you call rejection, He calls redirection. What you call abandonment, He calls advancement. He is not punishing you. The pain of letting go is temporary, but the peace that follows is eternal. And if you trust God enough to release, He will honor that trust with restoration, not always with people, but always within your soul. He will restore your joy. He will restore your clarity. He will restore your identity. And most of all, He will restore your faith. When God begins to separate you from someone, it is never random. It is never a mistake. It is divine intervention in motion. There is something happening in the spiritual realm that you cannot always see with your physical eyes. God is aligning your path not just for your comfort, but for your calling. You may not understand it in the moment. You may question the silence. You may wrestle with the void. But the void is often where God does His greatest work. In the absence of the familiar, God introduces the supernatural. In the stillness after separation, He plants new seeds of strength, discernment, and divine awareness. There is a transformation that begins deep within when you release what God never intended you to carry. You stop seeking peace in people and you begin to seek the one who is peace itself. You stop begging for love that hurts and you start embracing the love that heals, God's love. When you surrender a person into God's hands, you are saying, I trust that you know what I need more than I do. That level of trust shakes the foundation of fear. It silences the torment of doubt because you are no longer leaning on what is temporary, you are leaning on the eternal. There are people whose presence delays your growth because their spirit is out of alignment with what God is doing in your life. They speak words that plant confusion. They draw you into cycles that keep you spiritually stagnant. And even when your heart wants to hold on, your soul begins to rebel. You feel the tension not because of what they do, but because of what God is saying. And when God speaks, it's not always loud. Sometimes it's a deep, quiet restlessness that grows until you can't ignore it anymore. That unease is God's mercy. His way of pulling you out before the damage becomes destruction. Letting someone go isn't always a statement of how they treated you. It's a declaration of how much you value what God is doing in your life. It's recognizing that your time, your spirit, and your purpose are too valuable to waste on those who don't nurture what God placed inside you. You are not rejecting them with hatred, you are releasing them with wisdom. Because you finally understand that not everyone can go where God is taking you. You were not created to be entangled in confusion. You were not designed to live in emotional captivity. God created you for clarity, for growth, for forward movement. And when someone becomes an obstacle to that movement, no matter how familiar, how dear, or how long they've been with you, God will create a separation. And if you ignore it, you invite delay. If you resist it, you prolong your pain. But if you submit to it, you unlock peace. Every time you obey and release, heaven records it, heaven honors it. There is nothing you give up in obedience that God won't repay with something far greater. You may weep for a night, but joy will come, not from another person, but from the God who has never left your side. He fills what others drain. He restores what others break. And when you make room for Him, He does what no person ever could. He heals your soul. You must stop trying to resurrect relationships God already buried. Stop calling what God ended a mistake. Stop feeding what God has starved. When you let someone go, you are not being cruel. You are stepping into spiritual maturity. You are saying, my peace matters, my purpose matters, my walk with God matters more than clinging to what feels safe. Safe does not always mean sanctified. Familiar does not always mean faithful. And just because you had history with someone doesn't mean they belong in your destiny. And don't be surprised if people call you cold when you begin to walk away from dysfunction. Don't be shocked if they twist your silence into arrogance. That's how spiritual detachment feels to those who are feeding off your weakness. But you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to defend your decision, because God sees your heart, and when you obey Him, He defends your silence. He honors your restraint, and He lifts you above every storm that tried to pull you back into the chaos. Sometimes God removes people not because they are evil, but because they are not equipped to handle where He is taking you. Your next level requires discernment, protection, and unwavering focus. And some people, no matter how kind or well-meaning, carry spirits that interfere with that assignment. They speak fear when you need faith. They bring distraction when you need discipline. They offer comfort when you need challenge. And because God loves you too much to let you miss your purpose, He will call you to release them. Letting go isn't passive. It's an active spiritual decision to align with God's will. It is warfare. It is pruning. It is trust in motion. And when you do it with a clean heart, not out of pride, not out of resentment, but with full surrender, you open a portal of favor that no man can shut. You begin to attract what is from God and repel what is not. Your atmosphere shifts. Your relationships shift. Your inner peace grows, and your spiritual eyes are opened to a level of clarity you never imagined. This is what happens spiritually when you let someone go. You unclog the well of your spirit. You release space for God to pour. And He doesn't pour halfway. When He pours, it overflows. Peace that surpasses understanding, wisdom that silences confusion, strength that empowers your voice, authority that breaks every chain. And in that overflow, you begin to realize you never needed them as much as you thought. What you needed was God all along. And here is the truth. No one ever leaves your life without God knowing. Every exit has divine fingerprints on it. Even when it hurts, even when it feels like betrayal, even when it catches you off guard, God is not blind to your pain, but He allows it because He is writing a bigger story. And in that story, there are chapters that can only begin when others end. You must trust the author of your life more than the characters in your story. God is preparing something deeper in you. Letting go is not just about who leaves, it's about who you become in the process. You become stronger. You become wiser. You become more grounded. You stop seeking validation and start seeking God's voice. You stop explaining yourself and start walking in quiet confidence. You stop entertaining confusion and start living in clarity. And that is when God begins to elevate you. Elevation doesn't begin with applause, it begins with separation. God separates you before He uses you. He prunes you before He multiplies you. And that pruning often involves people you thought would be with you forever. But forever is a God word, not a people word. People can change, but God is unchanging. When you build your life around Him, you are never shaken by who comes or goes, because your foundation is not built on emotion, it's built on revelation. And if your heart still hurts, let it. Healing is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign that your spirit is still tender. That's a good thing. Let your tears water your new season. Let your silence become your sanctuary. Let your solitude become your spiritual school. In that space, God will meet you. He will whisper wisdom. He will renew your strength. And He will assure you again and again that you made the right decision. You are not empty. You are not broken. You are being refined. You are being made new. And what you lost in people, you are gaining in purpose. God will never ask you to release something unless He's planning to replace it with something more aligned with His will. The blessing is not in who left, the blessing is in who stays. And the one who stays with you through every storm, every silence, every tear is God. Let this be clear in your spirit. When God removes someone from your life, He is not taking something from you, He is taking something off of you. He is lifting a spiritual burden that you've been trying to carry, hoping it would eventually get lighter. But God does not ask you to endure weight that was never yours to bear. When you let someone go, you are releasing your spirit from captivity. You are choosing divine alignment over emotional attachment. And that choice, that sacred act of surrender, sends a signal into the spiritual atmosphere that you are ready for God to move in ways that exceed your imagination. There are times when God will allow discomfort in relationships not to destroy you, but to deliver you. What you think is falling apart is often God rearranging what you couldn't. And when the breaking comes, don't curse it, bless it, because that breaking is the hand of God severing ties that were suffocating your spiritual life. Sometimes God has to break your heart to heal your vision. Sometimes He has to shatter the illusion so He can reveal the truth. And when truth comes, it liberates, it cuts, yes, but it cuts away the decay, the delusion, the dependency. It clears the path for purpose. You were never meant to find your wholeness in another human being. You were never meant to let someone else's mood dictate your joy or someone else's opinion define your worth. That is not spiritual freedom. That is spiritual slavery. But when you let go, you are declaring, my peace, my purpose, my identity, they all rest in God alone. And when that declaration becomes your reality, you walk differently. You speak with authority. You no longer settle. You no longer shrink yourself to keep someone comfortable. You no longer plead for validation because your spirit has tasted the richness of God's approval. Letting go is not a loss, it's a revelation. A revelation of how much space someone took up in your mind, in your emotions, in your future plans, even in your prayers. But now, with that space cleared, God can speak louder. Now your prayers shift from asking God to change people to asking Him to change you. That is growth. That is maturity. That is spiritual evolution. You no longer pray for God to keep what He's trying to take away. Instead, you pray, God, give me the strength to walk away. Give me the wisdom to recognize what is not from you. Give me the courage to close doors you've already sealed shut. When you release someone, you're not just walking away, you are returning to yourself, returning to peace, returning to God. It is a holy return, a spiritual homecoming, and in that sacred place, God meets you not with condemnation, but with comfort. He doesn't remind you of how long you held on. He rejoices that you finally let go. And from that moment forward, He begins to rebuild quietly, patiently, powerfully. He restores the pieces of your identity that were buried beneath that relationship. He revives the dreams you silenced for someone else's comfort. He breathes life back into your calling. Do not underestimate what God can do once you've made room for Him. When you let go, you are not moving backward, you are positioning yourself for acceleration. What used to block you no longer has access. What used to distract you no longer has a voice. What used to drain you no longer has power. You are free, and in that freedom, God begins to pour. He pours revelation. He pours boldness. He pours healing. And you begin to see how small your world had become under the weight of the wrong attachment. Letting go is a spiritual purification. It's a detox for the soul. You will feel it in your sleep. You will feel it in your conversations. You will feel it in your silence. Everything becomes clearer, not because life is easier, but because your spirit is no longer at war with what God never wanted you to keep. That inner conflict fades, the anxiety lifts, the pressure dissolves, and all that remains is a stillness that only God can provide. And in that stillness, you realize something vital. Letting go was never about them. It was always about your growth, about your readiness, about your willingness to walk into a new dimension of spiritual maturity. It was about who you needed to become, not who you had to lose. Because when God calls you higher, He also calls you cleaner. He cannot build a future on a foundation cluttered with spiritual confusion. So He removes, He cleanses, He aligns, and all of it begins with your yes, your decision to let go. There are some seasons where silence becomes your sanctuary. God will pull you into a space where He quiets every voice but His. He doesn't do this to isolate you in punishment. He does it to insulate you in preparation. Because where He is taking you next cannot be accessed with divided focus. It requires clarity. It requires courage. It requires conviction. And you cannot walk in that level of spiritual clarity while carrying emotional debris. So God will allow the separation not to harm you, but to hollow you, to make space for something greater. Letting go activates a spiritual filter. You begin to see people differently. You begin to recognize energy that doesn't align with your assignment. You begin to feel when conversations drain you instead of feeding you. You become sensitive to what used to be invisible, because now you are not living out of your emotions, you are living out of discernment. That is what happens when you walk away in alignment with God. Your spiritual senses sharpen. You are no longer reactive, you are responsive. You are no longer bound by what happened. You are anchored in what God is doing. Sometimes the people you release will not understand. That's not your responsibility. Let them talk, let them speculate, let them misinterpret your silence. Your job is not to be understood by those God removed. Your job is to walk in obedience. Because the more you explain yourself, the more you invite confusion back into your atmosphere. You don't owe explanations for divine decisions. You owe God your full attention. And when you focus on Him, He fights battles you'll never even see. Letting go also reveals the idols we never knew we had. Sometimes we place people on pedestals. We elevate them in our minds. We allow their words to carry more weight than God's direction. And when they leave, we feel lost, not because we lost someone, but because we lost what we thought defined us. But that is the grace of God. He will expose false altars in your life, and in doing so, He leads you back to Him, the only true anchor, the only lasting source of strength, identity, and peace. And what's coming after your release will not be a copy of what you lost. God does not recycle people to comfort you. He prepares connections that complement your growth. He aligns you with those who reflect your future, not your past. So don't look for familiar faces. Look for divine fruit. Look for spiritual alignment. Look for conversations that stretch you, not soothe you. Look for presence that brings clarity, not confusion. And if you're still healing, know this: God is not in a hurry. He will allow the silence to work on you. He will let the solitude refine you. Because when the right season comes, you will be ready, not desperate, not broken, but whole. You may cry during this process. You may mourn the absence. You may revisit memories. But remember, your tears are not a sign of regret. They are proof of your release. Every tear waters the soil of your next season. Every silent night builds the foundation of your spiritual strength. And every moment you choose obedience over comfort, you grow into the person God has been shaping all along. This is the power of letting go. It is not the end of love, it is the birth of spiritual liberation. It is you choosing to protect your peace, guard your purpose, and honor God above all else. It is not a statement of failure, it is a declaration of faith, because you are no longer begging for pieces when God is preparing to give you overflow. And in that overflow, you will not find people who complete you, you will find people who match your completeness in God. You will no longer search for what was missing, you will begin to attract what is aligned. That is the blessing on the other side of obedience. That is the promise after the pain. And that is what happens spiritually when you truly let go. There's a depth to God's wisdom that we cannot grasp while we're clinging to what's comfortable. Letting someone go is not just about walking away, it's about walking towards something far greater than you can presently comprehend. It's about trusting that God sees further, deeper and clearer than you ever will. When you release what is not aligned with your spiritual destiny, you are making a sacred exchange. You are trading emotional dependence for divine guidance. You are giving up instability for eternal security. And in that surrender, you are declaring with every fiber of your soul, God, I trust you more than I trust my feelings. You see, the danger of holding on to the wrong person isn't just about emotional pain, it's spiritual distraction. Every moment you spend tied to someone who pulls you out of alignment is a moment you're not walking fully in what God has ordained for you. And God will not compete with attachments you refuse to break. If you want to go deeper in your purpose, clearer in your discernment, and stronger in your spirit, you must be willing to separate from whatever muddies the waters of your soul. Letting go purifies your direction. It returns you to center. And God always meets you at the center with clarity, conviction, and peace. Some people weren't sent to walk with you forever. They were sent to reveal what was still broken within you. They showed you the places you were still insecure, the places you were still searching for validation, the places you hadn't surrendered fully to God. So when they leave, it's not rejection, it's revelation. And what you learn through that revelation is what sharpens your spiritual maturity. That's how God teaches. Not always through comfort, but through conviction. Not always through blessings, but through the breaking. And make no mistake, God will allow your heart to break if it will save your spirit. Because some relationships are assignments from darkness dressed as companionship. They don't look dangerous on the outside, but spiritually, they steal your focus. They take up space that was meant for peace, and because you were too close, you couldn't see the erosion happening in your soul. But when God loves you, He doesn't let you stay blind. He interrupts your comfort. He exposes the cracks. He removes the distractions, not to punish you, but to prepare you. When God separates you from someone, it's often because He's trying to recalibrate your spirit. He is calling you back to alignment, back to discipline, back to the stillness where His voice can be heard without interference. Because the further you drift from His presence, the louder the world becomes. And the louder the world becomes, the more confused your spirit feels. That confusion is not random, it's the result of disobedience. But the moment you let go, you turn the volume of the world down and turn the voice of God up. You return to the frequency of truth. There is nothing more dangerous than being out of alignment with God while being emotionally attached to someone who is not from Him. That attachment becomes a stronghold, and strongholds must be broken, not with bitterness, not with violence, but with obedience. You must make a decision. God, even if it hurts, even if I don't understand, I choose your will. And that decision becomes your deliverance. That decision breaks cycles. That decision silences every lie that says you need someone more than you need God. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you start loving rightly. You start loving God above all else. You start loving yourself enough to protect your spirit. You start loving your calling enough to guard your peace. And when you make that shift, your entire life begins to reflect it. Your habits change. Your conversations change. Your boundaries sharpen. Because now you are no longer living for approval. You are living for alignment. And let me speak clearly to the ones who feel stuck in indecision. The longer you delay obedience, the more your spirit suffers. The signs have been there. The restlessness, the repeated arguments, the misalignment of values. That's not a phase, that's God's voice. That's His way of saying what once served you is now blocking you. And no amount of prayer will make someone right for you when God has already shown you they're not. You cannot pray peace into a relationship that God is using to teach you release. Do not underestimate what you gain when you let go. You gain spiritual clarity. You gain strength that's not dependent on someone else showing up for you. You gain a relationship with God that no one can interfere with. And most of all, you gain yourself back, the version of you that is healed, whole, focused, and deeply anchored in divine truth. You are not created to live in confusion. You are not designed to be manipulated, belittled, or drained. You were called to rise, to walk with strength, to move with purpose. And anything that keeps you from doing that must be surrendered. There will always be a voice in your head that says, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm letting go too soon? But let me tell you, God does not lead through torment. He leads through peace. When you release what's wrong, peace will flood your spirit. That is your confirmation. Peace is not found in the absence of pain. It is found in the presence of obedience. And when you walk in obedience, you walk in authority. Authority over your emotions. Authority over your environment. Authority over every voice that once caused you to question yourself. Do not be afraid of the silence that follows obedience. In that silence, God will speak louder than He ever has. You will find Him in the quiet. You will find Him in the stillness. And what you feared you'd lose in that release, God will replace with something deeper, something richer, something eternal. He never removes without replacing. He never takes without giving more. Not always in the same form, but always in a better one. You must believe that what God has ahead is worth the discomfort of what He's calling you to leave behind. You must believe that peace is possible on the other side of pain. And you must believe that if God is asking you to let someone go, it is because He is making space for something sacred. Something that will not confuse you, something that will not drain you, something that will walk with you, not pull you away from who you were born to become. Letting go is not giving up, it's giving in. Giving in to what God has whispered to your soul in moments of clarity. Giving in to the truth you already know. Giving in to the calling you've delayed for far too long. And when you give in, you don't collapse. You ascend. You rise with new strength. You rise with new vision. You rise with a spirit that is no longer shackled by fear. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone. God is still with you. His presence has not left you. His purpose for you has not changed. And if you trust Him, if you obey His nudge, if you let go of what is not meant for you, you will step into a season of divine realignment. A season where every step is guided, every door is intentional, and every relationship is a reflection of your new obedience. There is something holy in the act of surrender. Not a surrender to weakness, but a surrender to wisdom. When you let someone go because God is leading you, you are not collapsing, you are being consecrated, you are being set apart. Because the path that God is calling you to walk requires clean hands and a pure heart. It requires a spirit that is not tethered to confusion, compromise, or emotional chaos. God cannot pour into a vessel that is already full of what He never gave. So He calls you to pour it out, to release, to trust, to obey. Letting go is not the end of connection, it is the beginning of sanctification. It is the moment where you stop asking people to do for your soul what only God can do. It is the moment where your loyalty shifts from people to purpose, from emotions to truth, from dependency to divine alignment. And that shift, though invisible to the human eye, is felt in the heavens. When you release what God never ordained, You declare your allegiance to the unseen but all-powerful hand that guides your life. Some people were not meant to walk with you. They were meant to awaken something in you, and once their role is complete, God will start shaking the ground beneath that connection, not to harm you, but to unearth the truth, to remove what is no longer nourishing your soul. And if you listen closely, you will hear it, that inner alarm, that deep unease, that quiet knowing. It's God speaking, not in thunder, but in clarity, speaking not in pressure, but in peace. And when you finally listen, when you finally obey, the atmosphere around you begins to shift. There is power in release, the kind of power that disrupts cycles, the kind of power that breaks spiritual stagnation, the kind of power that gives you back your identity. Because when you let go, you reclaim what you gave away. Your voice, your joy, your clarity, your discernment. You no longer second-guess yourself to maintain peace with people who were sent to test you, not bless you. You no longer abandon your standards to keep someone who doesn't honor them. You rise, and that rising shakes everything that was built on compromise. It is not a loss to walk away from a connection that was never breathed into by God. It is a promotion in the Spirit. You are being elevated, not in applause, not in visibility, but in authority. Because now your energy is no longer scattered. Your vision is no longer blurred. Your time is no longer stolen. You are present with God. There is no room for confusion. There is no space for manipulation. There is no tolerance for disorder. Because you now know what peace feels like. And once you know peace, you no longer settle for disturbance. Letting go may feel like cutting off a part of yourself, but in truth it is pruning. And any gardener knows that pruning precedes growth. God does not take for the sake of emptiness. He prunes to multiply. He removes to protect. He redirects to prosper. And the people He calls you to release are not your punishment, they are your preparation. They taught you something. They showed you something. But they cannot carry what is coming next. And here's the deeper truth. If you do not release what God told you to let go of, it will begin to rot in your spirit. It will start to contaminate your faith. You will pray with doubt. You will worship with distraction. You will walk, but with a limp. Because God will not bless what He told you to leave behind. The anointing flows where there is alignment, and alignment comes through obedience. God is not looking for partial surrender. He is not interested in halfway obedience. He is calling you to let go fully and finally, not with one hand still clinging, not with your heart still bargaining, but with open hands and an open heart. Because the blessing that is coming next requires space, and God will not force His gifts into hands that refuse to be emptied. Do not let guilt keep you bound to someone who was never assigned to your journey. Do not let nostalgia make you ignore the present's warning signs. The memories may be sweet, but the fruit is bitter, and God speaks through fruit. What is the fruit of that relationship? Does it bring peace or panic? Does it align with your purpose or pull you away from it? God is not the author of confusion, and anything that consistently pulls you away from His voice cannot be His will. When you finally obey, even with trembling hands and a tender heart, God begins to move. Suddenly the silence becomes sacred. Suddenly your mornings are filled with clarity. Suddenly your nights are filled with rest. Not because everything around you has changed, but because you have changed. Your spirit is no longer bound by false hope. Your heart is no longer entangled in confusion. You are free. And that freedom is the gateway to deeper wisdom, greater strength, and divine acceleration. Letting go sharpens your discernment. You begin to see what you were once blind to, the manipulation, the double-mindedness, the inconsistencies. It all becomes clear. Because when your spirit is no longer clouded by emotional noise, the truth stands tall. God gives you eyes to see, and those eyes will no longer be fooled by charm, by convenience, or by familiarity. You now crave alignment over attachment, purpose over comfort, truth over sentiment, and that shift is a sign of spiritual maturity. You will start to realize that what you thought was love was actually distraction. What you thought was connection was really control. What you thought was stability was actually stagnation, and in that realization, your soul breathed for the first time in a long time. That breath is the breath of God returning to the places you silenced in order to accommodate someone who never saw your full worth. And if you're still battling the grief of letting go, hear this: God does not overlook your pain. He collects every tear, He sees every struggle, but He also sees what you cannot. He sees the doors ahead. He sees the healing coming. He sees the new friendships, the restored purpose, the clarity that's about to unfold. You may not see it yet, but trust this. When God removes, He also rebuilds. He does not leave voids. He fills them with Himself. And when God fills you, you are never empty again. So walk away, not with regret, but with reverence. Walk away not as a victim, but as a vessel that God is purifying, a vessel that God is preparing, a vessel that is no longer willing to carry what was never part of the divine assignment. Walk in strength, walk in truth, walk in the full knowledge that obedience today is the seed of overflow tomorrow. And when you let go, not only are you free, but you are finally, fully, and undeniably in position for the next move of God.